The ribbon never got cut. That's the part people remember. They remember the balloons, the television cameras, the bluegrass band warming up on the lawn, and Rebecca Holloway standing at the front entrance with a pair of oversized gold scissors, smiling like she'd just pulled off the biggest project our neighborhood had ever seen. What they don't remember is the county deputy easing his cruiser into the parking lot without lights or sirens. No drama, no rush. Just one slow turn onto a driveway that should never have been there. Most people thought he was another guest. I knew better. I'd been waiting for him. Rebecca spotted the cruiser and waved. "Glad you could make it," she called, lifting the scissors for another photo. The deputy climbed out, straightened his uniform, and walked toward her carrying a manila folder. Even then, nobody sensed anything was wrong. Camera shutters kept clicking. Someone in the crowd joked that the county must be there to congratulate the board. Rebecca laughed along with them. "Perfect timing," she said. "We're just about to make a little history." "Rebecca Holloway?" the deputy asked. She beamed. "That's me." He handed her the folder. "You've been ordered to stop using this entrance effective immediately." Her smile didn't disappear all at once. It faded piece by piece while her eyes moved across the first page. "There has to be some mistake," she said. One of the board members stepped in. "What's going on?" Rebecca didn't answer. She kept reading. A second later, she thrust the papers toward the association's attorney. "Tell me this isn't real." He skimmed the order, flipped to the attached survey, then stopped cold. Nobody reached for the ribbon. Nobody said another word. Even the photographer lowered his camera. You could feel the celebration draining out of the crowd without anyone announcing that something had gone wrong. The deputy spoke in the same calm voice he'd probably used 1,000 times before. "The court has issued a temporary order. This entrance cannot be used until the ownership dispute is resolved." Someone behind me muttered, "Ownership dispute?" Another voice answered, "Whose property is it?" Good question. For months earlier, I wouldn't have known either. Back then, I was just another homeowner spending a Saturday morning mowing my back field, thinking about everything except lawsuits and surveys. Sarah used to tease me about that field. "You mow it like it's a golf course," she'd laugh. She wasn't wrong. After she passed away, keeping the place neat became my way of keeping a promise. Every fence line, every tree, every corner of the property mattered because we'd built that life together. That's probably why I noticed the fence before anyone else did. It wasn't off by much. Maybe a few feet. Most people would have driven past without giving it a second thought. I shut off the mower anyway. The engine ticked as it cooled while I stood there staring at the new posts. Something about them felt wrong. Not dramatic. Just wrong. A construction crew was working farther down the hill. Fresh stone lined what looked like a brand new entrance. One worker caught me watching and grinned. "Pretty nice, huh?" "What's it for?" I asked. "The HOA's event venue." He wiped the dust off his gloves. "Big grand opening in a few months." I looked back at the fence, then at the stone entrance, then back at the fence. The distance between them didn't make sense. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I wasn't. Either way, I climbed back onto the mower with one thought I couldn't shake. If that fence was where I thought it was, somebody had just built the front door to their biggest project on the wrong piece of land. By Monday morning, half the neighborhood was talking about the new venue. Every mailbox seemed to have the same glossy flyer tucked inside. Weddings, charity dinners, holiday parties, corporate retreats. The HOA called it a community landmark. Judging by the pictures, they weren't aiming small. The artist's rendering showed a stone entrance, landscaped gardens, a renovated lodge, and enough parking to host hundreds of guests. Rebecca's smiling face filled the bottom corner beside the words, "A new chapter for our community." I folded the flyer and tossed it onto the kitchen counter. The fence was still bothering me. After breakfast, I drove over for another look. Construction crews were everywhere. Concrete trucks rolled in and out. Forklifts hauled pallets of stone across the site. Someone was hanging decorative lanterns along the entrance road. It looked less like an HOA project and more like a commercial event center. A worker waved as I walked over. "You here for the tour?" "Just curious." He pointed toward the entrance. "Pretty impressive, isn't it?" I admitted it was. Whoever designed the place knew what they were doing. The stonework looked custom. Fresh maples lined both sides of the driveway. Everything was built to make visitors feel like they were arriving somewhere special. Then I noticed something that pulled my eyes away from all of it. The entrance road lined up almost perfectly with the fence I'd questioned 2 days earlier. I stood there for another minute, tracing the property line in my head. It still didn't add up. Rebecca spotted me before I left. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she called as she walked over wearing a hard hat with the HOA logo across the front. "Looks expensive," I said. She laughed. "Worth every penny. This place is going to put our community on the map." I glanced toward the entrance. "You ever double-check where that road sits?" Her smile barely changed. "Of course we did." "You sure?" "Architects, engineers, surveyors, lawyers." She ticked them off on her fingers. "Trust me, everything's been handled." Then someone called her name from across the site. "Excuse me," she said before turning away. Big day. That should have been the end of it. For professionals don't usually make the same mistake. I tried convincing myself I was overthinking it. For the next week, I stayed busy around the house. Fixed a loose gate. Cleaned out Sarah's old workshop. Even spent an afternoon fishing at the county lake. Still, every time I drove past the construction site, my eyes went straight to that fence. It was like seeing one crooked picture hanging on an otherwise perfect wall. You stop noticing everything else. Finally, I drove downtown and walked into the county recorder's office. I wasn't looking for a lawsuit. I just wanted to know whether my memory was failing me. The clerk pulled the subdivision plat from the archive and slid it across the counter. "Anything specific you're looking for?" "Property lines." She pointed toward the survey marks printed along the edge. "Those haven't changed since the subdivision was recorded." I studied the map for several minutes. The measurements match what I remembered. On paper, my property line sat exactly where I thought it did. If the map was right, the entrance wasn't. I rolled the plat back up and thanked the clerk. She smiled. "Find what you needed?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But I think I know where to look next." On the drive home, I called the only person I knew who wouldn't dismiss a question just because everyone else seemed confident. Attorney Clara Whitmore answered on the second ring. I gave her the short version. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief pause before she asked one question. "Do you want to prove you're right? Or do you want to know the truth?" That wasn't the question I expected. It was also the reason I hired her. Clara's office sat above an old hardware store on Main Street. No marble lobby. No glass walls. Just creaky wooden stairs and a brass nameplate that had probably been there for 20 years. She waited until I finished explaining everything before saying a word. Then she slid the subdivision plat back across her desk. "Tell me what you actually know." I frowned. "The fence feels wrong." "That's not what I asked." She folded her hands. "What do you know?" I took another look at the map. "I know this is the recorded property line." "Good." She nodded once. "Anything else?" "I know the entrance appears to cross it." "Appears." She repeated the word like it mattered. "That's better." I let out a quiet laugh. "You're not making this easy." "It's not supposed to be easy." She leaned back in her chair. "People lose good cases because they start believing what they want before they collect the facts." She closed the file. "Go home. Don't confront anyone. Don't accuse anyone. And don't post a single word online." "So what do I do?" "Watch." "That's it. For now." A few days later, I did exactly that. Every afternoon, I found some excuse to drive past the construction site. Sometimes I'd slow down at the stop sign. Sometimes I'd park across the road with a cup of coffee and pretend to answer emails. The place changed almost daily. Stone columns rose at the entrance. Landscapers planted rows of fresh shrubs. Decorative lights appeared along the driveway. It was impressive, I'll give them that. They weren't building another neighborhood clubhouse. They were building a business. One morning I watched a flatbed truck unload a massive carved sign with the venue's name across the front. A crew spent nearly an hour positioning it between the stone columns. One worker stepped back, admired it for a second, and said, "That's going to look incredible in wedding photos." Another laughed. "People won't even remember what this place looked like before." I almost answered, "I do." Before the bulldozers showed up, Sarah and I used to walk that stretch of property every spring. She loved the row of old dogwoods near the fence. They weren't especially rare, but she treated them like family. Every April, she'd cut a few branches, bring them into the house, and insist winter was officially over. Even after she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to remove them. They reminded me that some things were worth keeping exactly where they belonged. A week later, I noticed orange paint marks on the ground near those same trees. Survey markings. My stomach tightened. The next morning, one of the dogwoods was gone. Its stump sat beside a pile of fresh dirt like it had never existed. I climbed out of my truck before I realized I was doing it. A foreman spotted me walking over. Can I help you? That tree's been there for decades. He glanced at the stump. Wasn't on the final landscape plan. Whose plan? He shrugged. You'll have to ask the HOA. I didn't. Clara had been clear. No arguments. No scenes. Just facts. So I drove home, dug an old photo album out of the closet, and started turning pages. Birthday parties. Cookouts. Sarah sitting beneath the dogwoods with dirt on her jeans after planting flowers. Then I found the picture I'd forgotten existed. Sarah was standing beside the fence, smiling straight at the camera. The date was printed across the bottom, 12 years earlier. I carried the photo to the kitchen table and laid it beside the subdivision plat. The fence in the picture lined up exactly where the recorded survey said it should. The fence outside no longer did. I picked up my phone and called Clara. She answered with her usual, "Whitmore. I found something." There was a brief pause. "A feeling?" she asked. "No." I looked at the old photograph again. Evidence. Clara studied the photograph for less than 10 seconds before reaching for a magnifying glass. She didn't look at Sarah first. She looked at the fence. Then she compared the picture to the subdivision plat spread across her desk. When was this taken? 12 years ago. Original print. I nodded. The digital copy still has the date stamp. She slid the photo back to me. Good. Don't edit it. Don't crop it. Keep every original file exactly as it is. I expected excitement. Instead, she was as calm as ever. A photograph isn't proof by itself, she said. But it's a good reason to keep digging. She picked up the phone and called someone before I could ask another question. Daniel? It's Clara. I have a boundary question. She listened for a few seconds. No, I don't want estimates. I want certainty. After hanging up, she glanced my way. He's booked until next week. Can we afford to wait? We can't afford not to. That answer stayed with me longer than I expected. Over the next several days, the construction site became even busier. Delivery trucks rolled in before sunrise. Crews worked through lunch. By the weekend, the stone entrance was finished, the landscaping was almost complete, and workers had started hanging banners that read grand opening next month. Rebecca gave interviews to the local newspaper like the project was already a success. This venue will become the heart of our community, she said in one article. People will be talking about it for years. She was right, just not for the reason she imagined. One afternoon, I drove past the entrance and found Rebecca directing volunteers as they planted flowers along the new walkway. She spotted my truck and waved me over. What do you think? She asked. Looks like you've put a lot into it. We have. She brushed dirt from her gloves. This is going to be something the whole county can enjoy. I glanced toward the entrance road. Ever wonder if you're standing in the wrong place? She gave me a puzzled smile. Still worried about that fence? Just asking. Well, stop. Her voice stayed pleasant, but there was an edge behind it now. We've had engineers, surveyors, attorneys, inspectors, everyone signed off. You're worrying about a problem that doesn't exist. Before I could answer, a volunteer walked over carrying a tray of lemonade. Rebecca accepted a cup, thanked her, and turned back to me. Come to the grand opening, she said. You'll see for yourself. I wished her luck and headed home. That evening Clara called. Don't go back there again. Why? Because if you're right, they're about to spend another few $100,000 improving evidence. I laughed. She didn't. I'm serious. You don't want me taking more pictures? Take all the pictures you want, from public property. She paused for a moment. But don't interrupt them. Even if I know they're building on my land. Especially then. That doesn't make much sense. It will. A few days later, Daniel finally arrived. He didn't start with measuring equipment. He started by walking the entire boundary with the old subdivision plat folded under one arm. Every few yards he'd stop, kneel beside an iron monument buried in the ground, brush away years of dirt, and compare its location to the recorded map. He barely spoke. Every so often he'd jot down a number, tuck the notebook back into his pocket, and keep moving. Nearly 3 hours passed before he unfolded the tripod for his survey instrument. By sunset, he packed everything into his truck and stood quietly beside the tailgate. Well, I asked. He rested one hand on the survey case. The monuments never moved. He glanced toward the new entrance glowing in the evening light. Something else did. Daniel came back 2 days later carrying a rolled survey tucked under one arm. He didn't waste time with small talk. He spread the map across the hood of my truck, smoothed the corners with both hands, and traced a red line with his finger. Here's your property. His finger slid a few feet to the right. Here's the entrance. He looked up. Those two shouldn't overlap. I stared at the map for a long moment. How far? Far enough. That was the most dramatic sentence Daniel ever spoke. Clara arrived about 20 minutes later. Daniel handed her the survey without another word. She studied it, compared it to the subdivision plat, then folded both documents together. This is cleaner than I expected. Good clean or bad clean? I asked. Good for us. She tapped the driveway on the survey. The entrance crosses your property before anyone even reaches the venue. So they built on my land. Part of it. Can they fix it? She looked back toward the stone entrance. Trucks were still coming and going. Workers were planting flowers along the sidewalks. Somebody had started hanging white lights from the trees. Sure, she said. If they tear it apart and start over. We watched the construction crew for another minute. Rebecca drove past in a golf cart, laughing with two contractors. She never noticed us standing across the road. I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since all this started. Should we tell her? Clara answered without taking her eyes off the site. No. Why not? Because right now we have a survey. She rolled the paper back up. I want to know why this happened. Does it matter? Very much. She turned toward me. Mistakes leave trails. Find a trail, and you usually find the truth. Over the next 3 weeks, we said almost nothing to the HOA. Construction raced ahead. The parking lot was paved. Decorative signs went up. Vendors delivered tables, chairs, and outdoor lighting. Local businesses started advertising wedding packages before the venue even opened. Every few days I drove past with my phone resting on the dashboard, snapping photos from the public road. The pictures told their own story. New retaining wall. New landscaping. New entrance lights. More concrete. More stone. More money. Clara wanted every stage documented. If they ever claim this was here before, she said, we'll have a timeline. 1. Afternoon, Rebecca spotted me again. She walked over carrying a clipboard and a bright smile that looked more practiced than friendly. You sure do drive by here a lot. Curious how it's coming along. She laughed. You'll have to book the place sometime. I glanced toward the entrance. I don't think that'll happen. Your loss. She shrugged and started to walk away before turning back. By the way, we've already sold out our first month. She sounded proud. I wished her luck and headed home. Clara called that evening. I think I found the loose thread. I met her at the office an hour later. She had half a dozen title documents spread across her desk. Most were routine closing papers. One folder was surprisingly thin. She tapped it with a pen. This file should be twice as thick. I flipped through it. Missing pages? Maybe. She shook her head. Or maybe something that was supposed to happen never did. She reached into the folder, pulled out a single draft agreement, and slid it across the desk. Read the last page. I did. Then I stopped. At the bottom sat 3 blank lines. One for a property owner. One for a witness. One for a notary. Not a single signature. The room went quiet after I reached the last page. 3 blank signature lines. No initials. No notary stamp. Nothing. I looked up at Clara. That's it. That's it. She slid another folder across the desk. I spent 2 days trying to prove this copy was incomplete. And I couldn't. She leaned back in her chair. County records don't have a signed version. The title company doesn't have one. The closing file doesn't have one. I stared at the draft again. So they planned to get permission. But nobody finished the job. She didn't sound excited. If anything, she sounded disappointed. People assume cases like this happen because someone gets greedy. Most of the time they happen because everyone assumes the next person handled the paperwork. Daniel arrived a few minutes later carrying the certified survey inside a hard plastic tube. He unrolled it across Clara's conference table and anchored the corners with 2 thick law books. Bright red lines cut across the map. Clean. Precise. Impossible to misunderstand. Daniel pointed to the driveway. Every guest enters here. His finger moved a few inches. This section belongs to you. Then he tapped the stone entrance. So does this. He stopped talking. He never added extra words when the map could do the work for him. Clara compared the survey to the draft agreement. Then she reached for the old photograph of Sarah standing beside the fence. 3 different pieces of evidence. 3 different years. All pointing to the same conclusion. She stacked them together and nodded once. Now the story makes sense. I asked the question that had been bothering me since the beginning. How does something this big slip through? Clara picked up a yellow legal pad and drew a straight line across the page. At one end she wrote developer. At the other she wrote HOA. Between them she added engineer, survey consultant, title company, closing attorney. Everyone trusted the person before them. She circled the blank signature page. This should have stopped the project cold. Instead, somebody assumed it had already been signed. She dropped the pen onto the desk. After that, the mistake just kept getting more expensive. Over the next week, she rebuilt the paper trail from scratch. Every deed, every plat, every survey, every permit, every photograph I'd taken from the public road. She wasn't trying to overwhelm anyone with paperwork. She wanted one clean timeline that a judge could understand in 10 minutes. Watching her work was like watching someone put together a puzzle without ever forcing a piece into place. If something didn't fit, she left it alone until it did. Late Friday afternoon, she called me into her office again. A thick binder sat in the middle of the table. Colored tabs stuck out from every side. Finished? I asked. Almost. She opened the binder to one page near the back. It was an internal title review dated months before construction began. Most of it was routine language until a handwritten note caught my eye. Verify entrance boundary before closing. Just one sentence. Nothing dramatic. Clara tapped the margin with her finger. Somebody caught it. Then why wasn't it fixed? That's the million-dollar question. She closed the binder. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they ran out of time. Maybe somebody assumed another office handled it. She shrugged. Doesn't matter anymore. Why not? Because courts don't decide cases based on guesses. She slid the binder toward me. They decide them with evidence. Monday morning we walked into the courthouse carrying exactly two things. Clara had the binder. Daniel carried the survey tube. I offered to help with the stack. Clara shook her head. Leave it. Why? She smiled for the first time in weeks. If two people can't carry the truth into a courtroom, it probably isn't the truth. As we stepped through the courthouse doors, my phone buzzed with a neighborhood notification. Grand opening celebration this Saturday. Everyone welcome. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. The invitations had already been mailed. The ribbon was already hanging. The only thing nobody knew yet was that the judge was about to decide whether anyone could legally drive through that entrance at all. The hearing lasted less than an hour. I'd spent more time waiting to be called than sitting inside the courtroom. Rebecca arrived with two attorneys and half the HOA board trailing behind her. They looked relaxed, chatting in the hallway like this was another meeting they'd knock out before lunch. One board member even joked, "Let's make this quick. We've got vendors showing up this afternoon." Nobody laughed after they walked through the courtroom doors. Clara carried one binder. Daniel carried the survey tube. That was it. I reached for the tube on our way inside. Daniel shook his head. I got it. Those were the longest 3 words I'd ever heard him say. The judge called the case, and everyone took their seats. Rebecca's lead attorney stood first. He spoke with the confidence of someone who expected the outcome before he opened his mouth. He talked about the investment the association had made, the number of local businesses depending on the venue, the weddings already booked, the charities scheduled to use the property, and the financial damage a delay would cause. It sounded polished, convincing. Even if you didn't know better, you'd think the case was about protecting the community. When he finished, the judge turned toward Clara. Counsel. She walked to the front, unlatched Daniel's survey tube, and rolled the map across the podium. No dramatic speech. No raised voice. She placed the certified survey beside the recorded subdivision plat, then laid the unsigned access agreement on top. 3 documents. Nothing else. Your Honor, she began. The venue isn't the issue today. The judge glanced at the survey. Go on. The only question before the court is whether the homeowners association has the legal right to use the entrance shown here. She rested one finger on the driveway crossing my property. Can the association produce a recorded easement? The attorney flipped open a binder. Another lawyer leaned over to help. Pages turned. Tabs moved. A minute passed. Finally, he looked up. Not at this time. Clara didn't react. Can you produce a signed access agreement? More pages. More silence. Rebecca leaned toward her attorneys and whispered something I couldn't hear. One of them slowly closed his binder. No. The courtroom felt different after that. Smaller somehow. The arguments about weddings and community projects disappeared. Everything came down to one missing document. Clara held up the internal title review. This note recommended verifying the entrance boundary before closing. She handed it to the judge. That verification never happened. Rebecca stood before her attorney could stop her. We relied on the professionals handling the transaction. The judge gave a slight nod. I'm sure you did. He looked back at the paperwork. But reliance isn't ownership. You could almost hear the air leave the room. Daniel testified next. He explained how he'd located the original monuments, confirmed the recorded boundary, and completed the survey. No opinions. No speculation. Just measurements. When the HOA attorney asked whether he was absolutely certain, Daniel answered without looking at his notes. The monuments have been in the same place for decades. Then he sat down. The judge called a short recess before returning with a signed order already. Waiting on the bench. Everyone stood as he read it. The court wasn't deciding final ownership that morning. That would come later. But based on the evidence presented, the Homeowners Association had failed to establish any legal right to use the entrance crossing my property. Until the dispute was resolved, access through that entrance would be prohibited without my permission. Rebecca stared straight ahead. One board member rubbed both hands across his face. Another quietly slipped the grand opening schedule back into his briefcase. Nobody argued. Nobody asked another question. Outside the courthouse, reporters hurried toward Rebecca. She walked past every microphone without saying a word. Clara waited until the crowd cleared before handing me a certified copy of the order. Keep this somewhere safe, she said. I slid it into the folder under my arm. Think they'll cancel Saturday? Clara glanced across the street where volunteers were unloading flower arrangements into a pickup truck with the venue's logo on the door. She watched them for a moment before answering. Not unless somebody tells them. She opened her car door, paused, and looked back at me. And that's not going to be us. Saturday couldn't have looked better if someone had ordered the weather. Bright sun, cool breeze, not a cloud anywhere. By 9 o'clock the parking lot was already filling up. Pickup trucks rolled in beside shiny SUVs. Volunteers handed out coffee and pastries while a bluegrass band tuned their instruments near the lodge. Kids chased each other across the lawn until parents called them back. It felt more like a county fair than an HOA ribbon cutting. Rebecca loved every second of it. She floated from one group to another, shaking hands, hugging sponsors, stopping every few feet for another photo. This is unbelievable, one local reporter told her. You've built something special. Rebecca grinned. Wait until you see it tonight with all the lights on. Nearby, photographers were already lining people up in front of the stone entrance. One more, someone shouted. Everybody look this way. Camera shutters rattled almost nonstop. I stayed near the edge of the crowd with a paper. Cup of coffee, far enough away that nobody paid much attention to me. That was exactly where I wanted to be. Clara's last words echoed in my head. Don't say a thing. Let the order arrive before you do. So I watched. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the small stage and tapped the microphone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being part of such an exciting day. Applause rolled through the crowd. In just a few minutes, Rebecca Holloway will officially open the newest gathering place in our community. More applause. Volunteers stretched the red ribbon tight across the entrance. Rebecca accepted a pair of oversized gold scissors and held them up while another wave of cameras flashed. Right here, one photographer called. Rebecca, over your shoulder. She laughed. You're making me work for this picture. Then someone near the parking lot frowned. Who's that? 3 county vehicles had just turned into the driveway. No flashing lights. No sirens. They moved slowly enough that most guests barely noticed them. A few people assumed they were late arrivals. Others kept talking, coffee cups still in hand. The bluegrass band drifted to a stop, one instrument at a time. The deputy climbed out first. The county attorney stepped out behind him carrying a leather portfolio. Rebecca spotted them and waved with the scissors still in one hand. Glad you made it, she called. Perfect timing. The deputy crossed the lawn without changing his expression. When he reached the ribbon, he stopped. Rebecca Holloway? That's me. She smiled for another camera. I need a quick signature? No, ma'am. He handed her a sealed folder. You've been served. Her smile froze. Served? She opened the folder, scanned the first page, then flipped to the attached survey. The color drained from her face. No. She turned toward her attorney. Tell me this is wrong. He took the papers, read the first page, flipped to the map, and stopped moving altogether. Nobody cut the ribbon. Nobody even reached for it. One television cameraman quietly lowered the lens aimed at the ceremony and swung it toward Rebecca instead. Every other camera followed. The ribbon wasn't the story anymore. She looked back at the deputy. "You're shutting us down?" "Today." The county attorney answered before he could. "The court has prohibited access through this entrance until further order. There are 200 guests here. I understand. We have weddings booked. I understand. People drove hours to be here. I understand." Her voice climbed with every sentence. The county attorneys never changed. Behind them, confusion spread through the crowd. "What's happening?" someone whispered. A little boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, are they still cutting the ribbon?" His father didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the survey folded open in the attorney's hands. One volunteer slowly lowered the ribbon until it brushed the grass. Nobody told her to. It just didn't seem to belong there anymore. Guests started drifting back toward the parking lot, not because anyone asked them to leave, but because they suddenly understood there wasn't going to be a celebration after all. The bluegrass musicians quietly packed their instruments. Caterers stopped unloading trays. Even the balloons tied to the entrance swayed in the breeze above an empty driveway that, for the first time since it had been built, nobody was willing to cross. No one ever announced that the grand opening was over. They didn't have to. You could see it happening one person at a time. A couple folded their lawn chairs. A family walked back toward the parking lot without finishing their coffee. The caterers stopped rolling food toward the lodge and quietly wheeled everything back to their trucks. Even the master of ceremonies stepped away from the microphone, set his note cards on the podium, and never picked them up again. The television crews, on the other hand, weren't leaving. If anything, more cameras showed up. A reporter standing a few feet away lowered her prepared notes into the trash and started over from scratch. "We're standing outside what was supposed to be the grand opening," she began, glancing toward Rebecca as another cameraman adjusted his shot. Rebecca hadn't moved far from the entrance. The oversized scissors were gone. The ribbon still hung between the posts. Untouched, she stood with both attorneys, reading the court order again while board members gathered around in complete silence. Finally, one of them asked the question everyone had been avoiding. "Can we move the entrance?" Nobody answered. Another board member tried. "What if we open another road?" One attorney rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Not today." "Then what do we tell the vendors?" "The truth." It wasn't the answer anyone wanted. I tossed my empty coffee cup into a nearby trash can and started walking toward my truck. Halfway there, I heard someone call my name. It was Rebecca. For a second I thought she wanted to argue. She didn't. She caught up, still holding the folded court order in one hand. "Did you know this was coming?" she asked. "Yes." She stared at me for a long moment. "Why didn't you say something?" "I thought about that before answering." "I tried." She frowned. "When the fence." Her expression changed almost immediately. She remembered. "You asked if we were sure about the property line." I nodded. "Twice." She looked down at the papers again. "I thought you were just being difficult." "No." A long silence settled between us. Finally, she let out a slow breath. I honestly believed everything had been checked. So did a lot of people. She gave a tired little nod, turned around, and walked back toward the board without another word. That was the last conversation we had before the lawyers took over. The weeks that followed were surprisingly quiet. There were no dramatic courtroom showdowns, no television debates, just meetings, surveys, title reviews, and stacks of paperwork moving from one office to another. Daniel's survey was independently reviewed. Same conclusion. The property line had never changed. Clara searched every county record, every closing document, every title file, hoping someone had simply misplaced a recorded easement. She never found one because there wasn't one to find. Eventually, the HOA asked to settle. We met in Clara's office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. This time there were no speeches about community landmarks or grand openings. Just documents spread across a conference table. The association agreed to purchase a permanent recorded access easement across the section of my property they needed. They paid to restore the original fence line, replace the damaged landscaping, and preserve the remaining dogwood trees Sarah had planted years earlier. Every page carried signatures. Every signature was witnessed. Every document was recorded before anyone scheduled another event. Exactly the way it should have happened from the beginning. A few months later, I drove past the venue on my way into town. Cars filled the parking lot again. White chairs were lined up on the lawn for a wedding. Guests laughed as they walked through the same stone entrance that had nearly become the HOA's biggest mistake. The difference was invisible to everyone except me. This time, they were crossing with permission. I pulled over for a minute before heading home. The fence stood where it always should have been. The dogwoods were blooming again. A light breeze moved through the branches, and for the first time in months, the place felt familiar. People still ask if I'm the homeowner who shut down the grand opening. I always give them the same answer. No. They usually look confused. Then I tell them what really happened. A survey did. The paperwork just caught up.